Welcome to the Financial Leaders Network. I'm your host, Alec Borland, and today I am joined by Dave Kunce. And together, we talk about Dave's journey from starting his career in a Big Four public accounting firm to eventually joining the FP&A function of a publicly traded company. From there, he was able to work his way into not one, but two CFO positions within privately held companies. We talk about his journey exploring acquisitions, both domestic and abroad, and his experience in selling a company itself. So sit back, take some notes, and enjoy the conversation here. Dave, thank you again for joining me here and sharing your wisdom and your path so far. Just starting at square one here, tell us a little bit about your path in becoming a financial leader.
Okay. I grew up here in Northeast Ohio, and I attended the University of Akron. Shortly after graduating with an accounting degree, I was hired on at Ernst & Young in Akron. Soon thereafter, I passed the CPA exam. I spent about a year or so in audit and then moved over to their tax department. And they ran that tax department almost like a small business department. And this is before the days of Sarbanes-Oxley. It was part of the Big Eight, but they had smaller clients that only needed reviews and compilations. And so even though I left the audit world, I could still go out and do field work, but it was on a much smaller scale. Yeah. We do compilations, reviewed financial statements. I was ultimately get passed over on the audit side. I'd review the footnotes, make everything sure was clean. But what I liked about it is you got to meet the owners of those businesses when you did those reviews and compilations, when you went out to do the field work. And, not only you did the field work, then you work on the corporate return, and then you worked on that owner's individual return. So you put a name and a face, and it really, really appealed to me. And I did that for almost 6 years. Ultimately, I decided even though you did reviews and compilations out there, the majority of the time was tax work. And I just kind of wanted to get the tax tar off my hands. So after about 6 years, I moved on to a publicly traded company. And I worked on budgeting, worked on financial planning and analysis, worked on forecasting, strategic planning, much different than just doing the tax stuff. So, I went from public accounting to a publicly traded business. I was there approximately 4 years, and 2 kids later, and about a 45-minute to 50-minute commute one way. Ooh. I realized, I don't know if this is really sustainable. I'm missing almost 2 hours of my seeing my kids. So, I reached out to my old client when I was at E&Y, and I indicated that I was looking and I'm available. If they have a need, keep me in mind, or if he knew of anybody, keep me in mind. He immediately, this is before emails. He immediately reached back to me through a letter and says, I have an interest. Let's get together soon. Ultimately, I joined his organization a couple months later, and my first day on the job, I was with his son looking at a new piece of equipment in Germany. And I was in Germany for 3 weeks, and I knew, I said, this is really cool. I mean, this company had a really good international reach. It had about a third of its sales were overseas. It bought a lot of equipment was from Germany. And it was very entrepreneurial. The company had some debt on it, primarily due to expansion and growth, and they had to buy more equipment, and they took on some debt. Eventually, we weaned off that debt. And it was a very entrepreneurial company that started in, I believe, 62, and the owner got an interest the second year in 63, and I joined that business in the mid 90s. So it was and I was with that business for 22 years, and every day was different. I absolutely loved that position. He brought me in. I eventually worked my way up to CFO. I was almost like his personal CFO for the first 3 years, plus helped the son get a new entity off the ground. And did the books and records for that business, did the books and records for another son he had in the business, worked on that set of books and records, got to understand that operation, went to the main business, and ultimately became the CFO. And I was CFO in the 2010, 2012 timeframe. That's when I started there, or started in that role. But
so that was your first CFO gig. Was that one? You worked your way into it.
I moved
internally.
Up. Yeah, absolutely. It was a very entrepreneurial business. And I got to learn everything from dealing in real estate and acquiring and building buildings or acquiring real estate to looking at equipment, attending trade shows, looking at acquisitions for complementary products that we made. And we were always out on the pursuit. And, I probably did about a half dozen acquisitions during my time there. Both international in Europe and also domestic. And it was a great run. Unfortunately, he developed pancreatic cancer and passed away within 6 months of that timeline. The three boys that were about my age were in the business, but they realized they didn't see it getting to the third generation. I did the due diligence on that sale. And it was sold to a large conglomerate. And, I knew what was going to happen. You kind of go from a guy on the court every day, use a basketball analogy. You're contributing either through an assist or through putting the ball in the basket to now going behind the scoreboard and keeping score and becoming a reporting robot and forecasting fool. So I did stick around for continuity purposes at their request. I was ultimately approached by some board members from an area company that was in the aerospace and defense manufacturing business, and I joined that organization. And so I've been public accounting, publicly traded company, and the last two have been family businesses. I think the next step maybe for me potentially could be in private equity, because I see that becoming a bigger player as these entrepreneurs created these businesses in the 60s are now get into deep into the second generation. And I think the success to get to the third is less than 10%. So PE is going to have more and more of a presence going forward.
And they are certainly restless the past couple of years, letting that dry powder just build up and not being able to deploy it. It's funny because I've had lunch this week prior to this recording. I've had 3 different lunches with IB companies that are primarily on the sell side. And each one of them specializes in companies that have EBITDA of $1 million to $2 million. And each of their value propositions is these companies are too small for the big investment banks, and the business brokers who are trying to help them sell it don't know what the hell they're talking about. Right. These are people who are buying franchises, or they're taking a course and they're saying that they're qualified to go and sell the business. Right. And it's, I mean, that scares the heck out of me when you think about it from an owner standpoint. That's the bulk of your wealth that you've been building is in that company. For ideally one big liquidation event, unless you're going to pass it on to the next generation, you're going to put it in the hands of somebody who doesn't have an accounting or finance background. Yeah, that's a conversation for a whole nother day. But I definitely agree that like private equity is a place where there's nothing but opportunities, and
they're going deeper and deeper. Meaning, smaller size businesses
in different industries. Look at what they're doing in the accounting industry right now. My alma mater, my first job with Cohen & Company, they just recently took a private equity investment.
Yep.
So
and they're doing everything, historically was manufacturing. Now they're getting into home services. They're buying a lot of HVAC, plumbing, electrical contractors, putting that all together. A lot of them are getting, you look at all these PE firms, now they even have a safety portfolio where the company manufactures safety equipment. So, I mean, it's endless on where they're going. And you're right, they got to start deploying that. I think 2024 was an election year. Some people, there wasn't that much M&A. I believe it was down 40% from an all-time high, but I think hopefully the business environment will pick up here in 2025 and you'll see a much more M&A activity.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be an exciting year for sure. So a lot to unpack from your journey so far. The first question, and we've known each other for a couple of years now, and it still astonishes me, but in understanding what it was when you originally started with EY, having a strong tax background, when I was in public, it was like you pick tax or audit, and that's it, right? You don't get that. I would have loved to have the opportunity, and some smaller firms I think do this today, but you have the opportunity to work in a couple of those different areas. So my first question is, when you were doing this, the clients that EY had at the time, I'm assuming they were all publicly traded, no? Or were they kind of a mix of private?
No, it was both. They're privately. Okay. They're privately. We would probably go down to, 15 to 25 million, and that's small on the we handled on the tax side of the house, and they kind of you had to do at least most of the time. A lot of times they liked you to an audit and exposed to what you got to do to tick the boxes, take the balance sheet approach, tie everything out. Everything's got to flow through the P&L, and then you validate everything. So being on the audit side for a year or two, you had the big publicly traded companies, but you got exposed to how you go about an audit. And frankly, I think that helped me pass the exam. Is like the last one I had to complete was the audit piece. I had it all, but physically doing it, and that it was, I could read it out of a book, but it just didn't gyrate with me. But when you actually went out and did the field work, it's like, oh, this is simple. And I probably had the highest score because I actually had to do it. But then, I got the ability to move over to tax. We ran it as a small business department, like I said, reviews and compilations. You got to meet the owners, which was exceptional. And develop a relationship with them. You do their personal taxes. You got to see how they ticked. What motivated them, and that's when I left E&Y and went to my client. I already had a rapport with him. He actually coached me and other family members in Little League Baseball, so I had known him for a long time, and it was a great.
Oh wow.
I probably would have retired there had they not sold. I mean, that's how much fun it was every day. Yeah, it really was cool. It really was cool.
What was it like making the transition from, because I think you went audit then tax, right?
Yep.
What was it like making the transition from tax at the time to the FP&A role when you left to go to your first client?
Well, I think I indicated I embraced it because, it became, I kind of moved up to tax manager and, when I at EY, and it's like, okay, I do love meeting with the clients and doing some field work, but all the tax compliance was getting a little bit monotonous, and so I embraced that opportunity to go to a publicly traded company, knowing that I could get that tax tar off my hands. So it was fun. I mean, it was just there was two divisions I worked for this company. So I got exposed to different products and you got, this company was a fantastic marketing company. I mean, they made products, but they were, I would say, okay production, manufacturers, but they were fantastic marketers. But, you got to interact with different departments, which was cool. When you're doing planning and analysis and strategic planning, you got to meet with people in R&D and marketing and new product introduction and when those are going to come out and what the expectation of those sales are, what the margins of those sales are. It's not like you're just throwing a dart at the wall and, hey, 5 years from now, we're going to be at this $1 million. You had to develop a plan on how you're going to get there. That was a change that I embraced. It wasn't overwhelming for me at all. But I like the fact that, I wasn't exposed to any budgeting at that point because there's, when you're doing audit work, you see next year's budget, but you don't know how that was developed and stuff like that. So, you got a deep dive into auditing and strategic planning and forecasting. And, when you're publicly traded, last thing they want to know is a blip or a miss. And you got to make sure you're dialed in on incoming orders and and when they're make sure they materialize, and from the time it orders placed and when it's going to ship and stuff like that. So they don't like any misses.
Sure. So that was the scenario where you were traveling a lot. It was far away.
No, that was with the publicly traded company when I did the planning and analysis and FP&A, and then I left that publicly traded company to my former client in the area.
Right.
And that was long stint at. That we had a long stint at, and that had a lot of international reach. Yes, that had really sold in a lot of 50 countries, and we made acquisitions in Europe. We bought machines in Europe. It was a great run. Yeah.
When you went into that client, your long stint where you're doing a lot of traveling and acquiring multiple businesses, did you go in an FPA role as well, or what did you go into that organization as?
I was almost like his personal accountant. He created a new legal entity that his one son was running, so I helped him get that set up. And that's where I went to the 3-week stint to Europe to look at a machine. And then it eventually got into different roles within the organization, whether it's I got exposed to banking. I got to be involved in acquiring new loans and taxable bonds, tax-exempt bonds, term financing, financing for new buildings. So it was every day was different. It was really fun. It really was. Yeah.
So it sounds like you were early on when you joined that company, you were building the CFO skill set to eventually it made like you were already operating at that level.
I was developing those skills to get to that formal level. Yeah. But someone told me, and it was a managing partner at E&Y, told me, and I always remember this, and this is a long time ago. When you're considered for a new role or a new title, it should be seamless. It's like you've been doing it already. And the announcement is an afterthought, because it's like, okay, Dave, you're formally now as CFO title, but you've been doing the work for 2 or 3 years building up. So it's no one's surprised. And I always took that to heart. It's like, you got to drive yourself to be at that next level. And so there's no surprises when it's announced.
Yeah. That statement right there, Dave, that's why we're here. That is, that I swear to God, like so many people, especially the younger generation, need to hear that, because they're coming out of college and they think they deserve to be CFO and get paid $250K a year right after they graduate.
Well, I give the credit to the managing partner in the Akron office, and so he said that, and I took that to heart. And it's like, okay, it's like you know what you think you know what you need to do, but then you've got. You got the message and the wisdom and the vision, and you drive for that. So,
so I've interviewed probably this is in my executive recruitment career. I've interviewed probably over 4,000 people. Yeah. And when I'm talking to people who are wanting to take that next step, a lot of them, a frustration that I commonly hear is, I'm already doing this job. Yeah. Right. And it's like, I'm doing the job already. I'm not getting paid for it or whatever, something like that. That's kind of a telltale sign that, okay, like you're probably about to get promoted if that's in the plan. I think back to my public accounting days, they give you the responsibility to show what you're going to be dealing with and make sure that you can handle it before they formally put you into that role. And I think that's, I feel like that's probably how it should be.
Yep.
In a lot of scenarios. So with being in a role like that, the accounting and finance profession, in most scenarios, it's a very consuming one. So, how do you balance work life?
I think you got to figure out what that outlet is, or how to shut it off when you walk out the door. Okay, from the office. Now, granted, not every day stops when you walk out the door, especially today with technology. You have to open up the laptop, and there's occasions you have to bring work home with you, whether it's prepping for a board meeting or following up. But you can't do that, 5-7 days a week. I mean, that's kind of got to be the exception. If I have to, majority of the time I'd work through the lunch hour just so I know I could get out at a relatively decent time. And when I walk out, I can turn it off. And what does turn it off mean? It's different to everybody. It's different for everything. Um, I'll give you some examples. So when I left Ernst & Young, I said I went to a large publicly traded company. Well, that was a long commute. That was 45, 50 minutes one way. At that time, they didn't have podcasts and stuff like that. But I like sports radio and sports talk shows. So I turn it on, and I learned when I get in the car, it says, okay, I turn it on and get on the road. And you had that 45-minute interval to unwind by the time you walk. Because when you get home, if you have a significant other or spouse or kids, you got to kind of give their your dedicated time to them. So, that's how that's when I was like, okay, I got to find a way to really turn this thing off. And with the long commute, that helped. But my boss at the time said, turn it off when, when you walk out the door, you got to turn off work, and you got to figure out what that mechanism is to do it. Later on in life, I found that if I got into a fitness or sport, a routine fitness center, you may be hitting it on the way home a couple days a week. When you're on elliptical or a treadmill or lifting weights, your mind is off the business. Right. During more recently, like when COVID hit, I bought a Peloton bike, and then I just used it every day in the morning. And that's, it's like that, or when you come home from work, you hit it. And when you're on that, you're not thinking of that. You're not thinking work. So, and another thing, if you have younger children, as they start to get involved in, and I'm a big proponent of getting them involved in something,
right.
Whether it's sports or, whatever they like to do, whether, it's singing or ballet or football, baseball, basketball, whatever it is, male, female, whatever they like. All three of my kids love sports. So I was big on, attending those events. Even at practices, like I coach my two boys in baseball and basketball. And even though that's a big commitment, it's like, oh, that's a little bit stressful too. It's like romper room, especially when they're young, you got to get focused and stuff, but you're not worrying about work, at that particular hour or whatever, hour and a half, 2 hours, you're not worried about work. And, I coached them up till, a certain age to about 14, and then they got into travel, and then I was done with it. But even if you don't want to actively participate in their sports activities, if they are into some sports, take you have a phone, your iPod, and put on a podcast, or even driving from work, you put on a podcast, take your mind off what you need to do. And there's also a chance for you to stay healthy too. If they're doing a sporting event and it's near a football field and there's a track field nearby, walk the track. I think fitness and keeping in shape and keeps your mind healthy, and you don't go crazy. And if you're not a fitness nut, bring a book, sit in a chair, or sit in the car, bring a book, and take your mind off, work. It can be stressful. You can't let it control and run your life. Otherwise, you just, you lose it, And I think that's whatever, everybody's different, but you got to find that ability to decompress. And, I think fitness is a good way, listening to music, reading a book. But while your child is at that event, find time to take care of yourself.
Yeah. I think fitness should really be a mandatory, because it really just, that it releases the chemicals that it needs to. Like,
absolutely.
It is just, what's the point in working so hard if you can't physically go out and enjoy fruits of your labor, right? Going on different trips or whatever.
Right. And if you're not coaching your son or daughter, then your child is participating in it, you got a babysitter for an hour and a half or 2 hours. Take care of you during those 2 hours. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So getting a hobby, prioritizing some way to take your mind off of the problems that you've been thinking about all day, because it definitely can absorb you fully when you're just thinking about one thing all day.
Yeah. And with today's technology, there's almost no excuses. You can do an ebook, you can do, get on Spotify or Apple and do it and listen to your favorite podcast, or listen to some music, back in the old days, you couldn't do that.
Right. Sure.
Right.
So
showing my age.
No worries. So with everything going on, just like from a work standpoint, any big challenges you've had to kind of overcome lately? Any special projects that you've kind of been putting your head to?
Oh, one of the things with my latest employer, they're in the aerospace and defense industry. We did a tuck-in acquisition. And it became a wholly owned subsidiary. It was a smaller business owned by a husband and wife team. Fantastic people. They didn't exactly want us, walking in the door and during the due diligence period. So you did it from a basement from a neighboring hotel, in a little conference room down there. But it is what it is. Due diligence went great. We probably started in October, and they didn't want to announce till close to December, and then we took ownership January 1. But we had done all the due diligence, everything. There's no surprises. We discovered early on in the due diligence period we had some IT concerns because they had some older servers. Since we did military work with the parent company, we had to be compliant with they called CMMC, which is like a cybersecurity maturity model certification. We had to bring them up to the standards. The servers were outdated. They had an older ERP system we discovered that was kind of way past. They hadn't put in the patches, and they were on version, 5, and I think in the marketplace they're past 11. So maybe exaggerating, but they deliberately hadn't been keeping updated, knowing that potentially they were, going to eventually sell, and that system would go away. We announced everything was fine. We hit the ground running. I had my IT reported to me. We went out there, put in the new servers, plug and play, everything's seamless. They had some outdated laptops, got the newer ones in place on day one. Everything's fine. But, with the ERP system, we knew that it wasn't sustainable. So we made a decision within 6 months, we wanted to go live on our system. You plan for it. After you get through the first couple of months, we set a date and we said like April 30th. We mapped everything over into a testing environment. We allowed them to train. We provided them manuals. It wasn't that hard, but when you're a business trying to just keep shipping orders and stuff, we found out that the individuals who were supposed to be training didn't spend that much time training. So we had a false start at the end of April. I had my controller out there and a financial analyst out there, and they called me on. It was going to go live on a weekend. They called me and says, "Dave, we got a table if they're not ready." And I says, "Okay." I was disappointed in that. We'll postpone it, and we're going to go live July 1st, and we're going to make sure that they're continuing to test. We had weekly meetings walking through. They had manuals. Make a long story short, is we went live on July 1st, and with the first week, we recognized we're in 3 to 5 foot waves. My point to get around this is, you think you have this thing scoped. You provide planning, you have training, you have one-on-one, you provide them manuals, you go through, you provide them an environment to test, and it goes off the rails. And you just need to be prepared to react to that. We found out that they didn't test as much as they said. But at the end of the day, you can't forget about the customer. You got to provide friction-free customer service. They never felt the pain points, but internally there were a lot. And like I said, the first 2 months we were in 3 to 5 foot waves. As we get into September, October timeframe, we're into 1 to 3 foot waves. And then I told, the mandate for me was, hey, it's got to be glass. It's got to be like a glass. The lake's got to look like glass by month 5. It was, and it's just, what I like is, my IT department reported to me, and they could be very reactionary. I mean, they could react timely and get at it. It's just, I heard a quote in the Wall Street Journal one time, says the only person who likes change is a baby with a wet diaper. And and
That's good.
you can make your acquisition, and if those individuals are setting their system and where to find stuff, it's change.
It's hard.
changed.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's hard.
And our ERP system wasn't that intimidating, especially when we had complete manuals on how to go through the process.
Yeah.
But to get from 3 to 5 foot waves to get to glass, I took my IT department out to that location. It was out it was in Utah. We got through it. We spent some one-on-one time. Tell me about your pain points.
Yeah.
You don't like to ridicule them, says, but this was early on in the process. We talked about this, and at the end of the day, you got to get him across the goal line. So we did. By the end of the year, everything's fine. We did did a complete physical again. We did one right at the time of acquisition. We did one late in the fourth quarter. So we had a opening, inventory balance sheet, ending inventory, strong physical performed. But we got through it. But it's challenging every time, like I said, it's changed to some people, and some people don't embrace it. Some people do. So
it's hard when you've got a company like that to get people who have been doing something one way for so long and then come in and say that you really.
And they also got to service their customers. They have a day job, and it's hard for them to find priority time to test. And then that's ultimately what we discovered. It's been great people, great acquisition, and it's grown, and they've taken on new customers. It's a really, really good process. I ultimately started running that at some point after the ERP implementation, and building a stronger rapport with the people out there. I go out there once a month, but great people, great owners, that sold. They're still involved in the business, and very profitable.
Yeah, what I found that,
but it was painful.
If you can show them how it's going to make their life easier, most people are going to be able to hop on board. But if you're saying, "Hey, you got to do this because of this," you normally don't get as strong a buy-in.
Right. So, or they say, "Hey, this is how I used to could go a deep dive in my old system, and how do I do that now?" And ultimately you get to the same point, but it's different steps, and it's change. Right. It's change.
So what have you learned from that acquisition? And I was going to make it a 2-part question. I'm going to keep it a 1-part question. What have you learned from that acquisition that you're going to apply to future ones to make them go smoother in the future? If we won't say smoother because that implies that it wasn't smooth, but to make it more efficient.
I think you need to have set the expectations firm and hard up front. But it's hard when it's a new acquisition because you're just starting to meet these people, and you can't sit there and impose your will on it. I think if they had had more updates on their system, we probably would have gone a year. It was just so close, it was within 4 months. Initially, we tried to get it across the goal line, and we had the false start. That was April 30th. We had just acquired them on January 1st. That's 4 months after the acquisition. Ultimately postponed it for 2 months later, and everything went smoothly. We took over the cash management side. We had the bank relationship side. We wrote the checks. We collected, we had complete visibility on deposits and everything like that. I guess in a perfect world, you would have given them a little more runway, for them to get comfortable. At the end, though, as a leader, you got to make a decision. We're going to go live or wait. And ultimately we went live July 1st within 6 months, which is tough. But at the end of the day, if you had delayed that, you're further behind. You know what I mean? Because now once you get that ERP, it's choppy the first 2 months, 3 to 5 foot waves, down to 1 to 3 foot waves the third and the fourth month, and as you're getting out of the fifth month and into the 6th month, it's glass. It's painful, but you're going into the next year with people have a complete understanding of how that system operates, what its capabilities are, where to find information. I don't have any regrets. It's that fine line of you're just meeting these people and you're setting the expectations that they're going to have to spend some additional time over and above their 40 to 50 hour work week to learn the new system. And it's hard to do. So, I give them a hall pass on that. You can't there sit there and impose your will, especially on a new relationship. But you asked, what was a challenge you recently tackled? That was one I recently tackled.
Love it. Love it. So when you were with the company before that one, I think you said you had acquired business or you'd help sell off parts of that business? You were doing acquisition. Oh,
both.
Okay,
so that the long run was there for 20 plus years. I probably had about 6 acquisitions and one sold off a division and then ultimately sold off the whole company.
And that was both domestic and international with those different acquisitions too, right?
Yep. And the most recent one is primarily domestic. We did this tuck-in acquisition that was out west, but in the uncertified space. It's a really cool company.
Excellent. So similar question to the one before. So with the various acquisitions at the international company where you're doing those acquisitions and sales, any takeaways that you're like, hey, I need to apply these or take note of that for future acquisitions or sales? Anything in that area?
Yeah. We bought one business when in Europe that was in Ireland, that was in distress. And it was brought to our attention at a trade show I attended. And we went, and that was the only one we didn't do due diligence because it was a distressed sale. It was already liquidated. Okay. And so we didn't really have the chance to do any due diligence. It was the point of final liquidation. They had a good name in the industry. There's some brand awareness. But the people were primarily let go, and it was really an asset sale. So we bought the assets, and we brought the people back. Once we acquired it, we got what we called an Irish MBA.
Okay.
Because we discovered, we fell in love with the backlog, which was over 700 million euros. So it's like, okay, if we get these orders, we can fulfill these orders, we're fine. Well, we discovered, in that country, if someone works 40 hours, or if they work, 45 hours in week 1, they only have to work 35 in week 2. And so they want you to add more people. So we could never work out of the backlog. All we kept doing was not satisfying orders. We held on to it for a period of 5 years. I mean, it was, we tried to turn it around, and ultimately we had to dissolve it. We could never fulfill those orders because we could never get ahead. We could no longer take on new orders. We couldn't even complete orders that were past due, and so it was frustrating, but we got an Irish MBA. You live and learn. Yeah. And as the owner once says, when you do something, you have to ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen, and just make sure it doesn't cripple you, for life. You can work through it. And as an example, where we didn't do the due diligence, we didn't have the availability to do diligence. We just bought this businesses, had good brand awareness, made a special product that we didn't make, but. We tried our best to turn around, but we couldn't because we could never get ahead. And so we satisfied every payable, we collected every receivable. We satisfied every obligation, and we did the right thing to everybody at the end in terms of vendors and customers we tried to fulfill. And we ultimately notified we are not going to be able to satisfy you. So they had the opportunity to go someplace else, but we paid everybody, we wound it down, legally the right way. It's one thing you do business, even if you make a mistake, you got to do things the right way. Because, we had good brand awareness ourselves. I knew we had acquired it, and we took care of everybody. And ultimately, we wound them down, consumed a lot of our time. But that's a learning experience,
Yeah. So you said that's a specific labor law in Ireland that they.
That was in Ireland. Yeah. So we could not. we could not get ahead,
Okay. So if a good shiny brand names in front of you,
well, they want you to hire. They want you, if you got additional orders, they want you to hire more people as opposed to working overtime. They want to put that labor force into work, and that's that fine line where you got too labor intensive, and you gotta incentivize people the right way. But it wasn't about hiring. It's just like you got to put the current workforce to be productive and efficient. And ultimately, we couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, though. That's a interesting side quest, if you will. So, this is kind of switching gears here, but what do you think? When you look back at your career so far, what's a trait, maybe a couple, that kind of stand out that have helped you be a successful financial leader?
I think you need to be accountable. You got to be accountable to yourself. You got to be accountable to your boss, and do what you say you're going to do, and recognize. The other thing, you need to recognize you're only as good as the people you surround yourself with. So as you move up the food chain, you gotta build a strong staff, and it gives you the ability to get out of the weeds. They can handle some of the day-to-day tasks, and then you can work on the business instead of just being in the business every day.
Right.
Another thing that helped me along the way is I don't micromanage, and I don't like to micromanage people at all. I think a good CFO recognizes early on you're good as the only people you surround yourself with. You set the expectations with those people, and you let the horses run. You inspect what you expect, but you don't micromanage them. So, if needed, you have to have that crucial conversation if they're not meeting your expectations with that individual that's not being at that high standard. So, if they get off the track, you got to let them know early. You can't allow them to flounder. And they need, frankly, they need timely feedback if they're not meeting your expectation.
Got it. So it's keeping yourself accountable, keeping your team accountable.
Yep.
Love that. When it comes to
the other thing I would say in order to be successful is, don't be afraid to get out of your swim lane. Okay. And by that, I mean, a board advisor one time said to me, Dave, you're CFO, your swim lane starts at one end of the property line and goes to the other end of the property line. And he's right. You look at an income statement and you determine where the cost overruns are. You have a budget, and then, or even drill down to a job or a project, and you determine, what's the root cause. And my point is, don't be afraid to stick your nose in other people's or other departments' businesses and determine what the problem is. And, is it a people problem? We don't have enough training. Is it personnel? We didn't hire the right people. We make the wrong hire. Is it a process problem? Is a job routed on the wrong machine, or is the standard cost wrong when the engineer did the time study on it? Is it a system problem? Is it an automation problem? Or is it routed on an older machine that can't hold tolerance, that doesn't have preventive maintenance? My point is, don't be afraid to get out of your swim lane and inject yourself in other, because ultimately you need to know where the cost overruns and what's causing the cost overruns are. There might be some resistance to that. And I'll counter that by saying, don't throw stones when if you live in a glass house. But what I mean by saying is your house has got to get in order in your department, and before you start picking your battles outside your department and on financial, when you're challenging people, because people get very territorial, and sometimes they resent it. But if you're well respected in the organization, and the people that work for you are well respected, and you held them to a high standard, they have no challenge. They really don't. They can, it is what it is. At the end of the day, you want to be a team player, and you want to move the needle, improve the business, and you're just trying to help them help themselves sometimes.
Right. So keep yourself accountable, team accountable, once your team's in order, once they're in a good standing.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to understand and ask questions about the business.
Absolutely.
Like, is this how it's supposed to be?
Some things you benefit from that because you're building a rapport. Sometimes it makes be a little choppy at the beginning, but hey, look, I'm not here to look under the hood and run to the CEO and saying your house isn't in order. I'm here. Right. Let me help you with a solution. And that's where you talk about automation. You can have automation in your department. You got to be a proponent for technology improvements out there. If guys, say, hey, this machine is 15 years old. We've done the best and it's past its life cycle. Yeah. It's always down when it is up and running. It can't hold tolerance to this new product offering we're running that, when it was quoted, it had a high margin because it was a new product, but the tolerances are very tough to manage under the current conditions. That's where it's a learning experience. You're learning. You don't learn that sitting behind your desk. You learn that walking the floor. Okay.
100%. What technologies are you excited about these days?
I would say the technology out there that people are going to have to embrace is really, it's AI, and there's different parts of AI, understanding its capabilities, how it can work with maybe Excel. They call it Excel Copilot. But it's great in terms of data cleaning and report generation and doing deep dives and eliminating some human error on formulas, and it can help with scenario analysis and forecasting and budgeting, trend analysis. Like I said, it can help eliminate errors and inconsistencies in data sets and streamline tasks, automate data sourcing, classification, enhance forecasting. So that's the elephant that's out there. Right. The thing is, if AI is used properly and in the right hands, it's an outstanding, model. When I was with my, my most recent employer, I mentioned aerospace and defense. And so, what kept me up at night was cybersecurity, because, those manufacturers that make components that go into defense, they're probably the most vulnerable, because you have everything from a mom and pop shop that makes a small piece that's essential for component that goes into a defense mechanism, or you have a bigger company. We found a company that was a security information monitoring event system. Okay. I think the vendor was called Logarithm, but it had AI functionality in it. And so it would identify threats and alert our IT department in real time. And it would detect anomalies. It's almost like a cyber shield that was constantly scanning for imperfections or anomalies or unusual events. And it could prevent, the B word that every CFO hates is it's breach. Okay. It could help eliminate a breach. And that's what kept me up at night is a cyber event where there's a breach where someone penetrated that shield and got into it. So that's a great example where AI is outstanding, and then it helps streamline processes, whether it's an AP or an AR, but then you worry about the bad actors that have access to AI or use AI to their advantage. Like, you go on like a Facebook or Instagram, and you see these people that are talking, but it's not what they're saying. They have somebody else's voice saying words, and you think it's them. And you think about that people can do that, and impersonate CFOs or other people in senior management positions with, say, for example, with a bank, and trying to impersonate them. So you have the bad actors out there. We have this situation where someone tried to impersonate someone on an email saying their routing number and account number changed and provide that to HR. And so the next deposit went to the new, and that's where AI is bad. Another thing is, you think about a teacher at a high school to put out uh, for an English class that has a writing project. How can you determine whether that student is just writing or it was completely AI assisted? That's the downside, and hopefully, it's a always changing environment, and hopefully they can get some of you get it away from the bad actors or the ability to use it for the wrong purposes. But I think AI it's here to stay. It's like when Wang came out with the first computer. The first computer was here to stay, and Wang's no longer around. There's other computers, but you think about the early Compaq and all the early computing companies. But computers are here. It got smaller. Everyone takes a laptop. It's always in a book bag wherever you go. It's
pretty much
around the airport.
They're in your pocket too.
That's right.
That's right. Your cell phone's essentially a computer.
Yeah. So AI is the technology that is used properly is outstanding, and it can streamline, take costs out of the business. But in the wrong hands, it keeps you up at night. Right.
Right. I think to your educational relation there, we're going to have to go back to handwriting again.
That's right.
Paper,
Bring
right?
out the 11 column spreadsheets and draws foot and foot down with the 10 key.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but I think when it comes to the finance function, at the end of the day, it's meant to make people's lives easier, not to replace anyone. It lets you do more of the analytical work that most people want to get into. I don't think at one point, I don't think probably within the next 5 years, this might happen. It could happen at the rate things are changing, but the transactional function, right? The logging of just general bookkeeping, the really monotonous basics. I think that can be completely automated, but comes to actually analyzing the financials, making business decisions, shaping the overall strategy, a human is the one who's going to have to do that. And so as long as we're looking at it the right way and using it for those situations where we can help keep data and companies safe, and that breach, far out of the picture, that's what we really want to leverage there. But,
and even like an AP in terms of who issued the PO, when the invoice comes in, it could automatically. I mean, there's other software like DocStar that can do it, but with AI enhancement, I mean, just really streamline the process. And that's at the end of the day. That's what you want to try to take costs out of the business.
Yeah. One situation that I see a lot of CFOs dealing with, and really just anyone, again, in the accounting finance function, you've got your short-term goals, but you need to still be thinking long-term. How do you balance short-term results with long-term planning?
I think personally, a good CFO has to be able to balance working in the business and working on the business. And I think that, and can think strategically and that should come naturally, for a good CFO. In a family business that's very entrepreneurial, you can say, okay, here's where we're at now. Here's where we want to be. And how are we going to get there? Are we going to go, is it through acquisition? Is it through new product offering? Is it through technology enhancements with new machinery? And that's where you're working on the business. And, you have the routine is, your 3-day close or 5-day close. And then that's where I think you need to be able to delegate as much as that as possible. The controller should be able to handle that. And then you sit down and review the month. And then, don't wait until the month end before you react. I mean, we developed items where we had daily reports on visibility on incoming orders, the backlog, what scrap so we kind of had dials in place on an executive chart or dashboard, if you will, where we knew where the budgeted sales were we on track? We knew where incoming orders should be, how much we're shipping each day, what scrap is, what our efficiency is, our productivity. So there should be no surprises. That's where you're in the business every day. But working on the business, I think for really good elite companies, a CFO, whether it's a family business, it's entrepreneurial, should spend more like 65% on the business and 35% in the business. When you're, if you're working for private equity, when you're in the, they're big on the 13-week cash flow, the forecasting, and that's kind of the day-to-day stuff where you're updating and tweaking that. But also, um, if you're going to work for a PE firm, they'll probably share an underwriting memorandum or investment thesis early on. And so, they have a study of what the market is. They feel what they can get this business for, but they also know what what they need to do to drive the strategic planning. And I think a good CFO should sit hand in hand with or be tied at the hip with the CEO to drive the strategic plan to get that objective.
Right.
The runway for PE historically had always been, 4 years in and out. Well, I think with COVID and multiple expectations from the sellers and interest rates, that's been changed. It's more like 6 years. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you join a firm and you know what the exit's going to be if it's 6 years, 6 years from now.
Right.
Then you drive to that, and that's part of the strategic planning. So,
Right.
I think you got to be able to balance it, and it depends. If you're a business that's highly leveraged and not growing, obviously, then you're in the weeds. You're in turnaround mode, so you're not working on the business so much as you're just trying to stop the bleeding, get the bus right sized, and then move on. So
it's really, it starts with the end in mind, and then it's a matter of tracking it on a day by day, week by week, in the weeds basis. And then based on how you're doing in accordance to what the long-term goal is, determines the percentage of high level versus.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, but every day you come in to the job, I say move the needle. You want to move the needle. You want to improve every day. And you're driving that performance every day. But on the other side, you got to keep your head up at 35,000 feet as well. Say, here's where we're at. Here's where we want to be in 5 years. What's going to get us there? Is it investment in technologies, investment in CapEx, throughput? Identify the pain points and take action on them. And whether it's technology, my one business I was with was made to stock. We put it in an automated vertical storage system, and it was great. I mean, before it was all labor intensive, hand picking, and some errors. We got really good throughput and fill rates once we put the automated system in place. Scan it off the pack slip, and that product would come to you. You'd pick it, you double scan, make sure you got the right product, and it goes out the door. But that's where technology and enhancements really are part of the strategic planning. And I loved attending trade shows because you see what the competition is. You're always looking for the next big thing. So I like having a wider bandwidth. I've had other departments report to me that are non-traditional for CFO. I've had business development report to me. I've had design engineers. It's like, what the hell do you know about design engineering? Absolutely nothing. But I know how to herd the cats, and you set the expectation. You got to hold them accountable. I know
what we're driving towards and how you play into it.
Exactly. I've had materials and planning that did all the scheduling, that in purchasing, HR, IT. So, I'm not your green visor, sleeve protector CFO. So I like having a wider bandwidth that I have that allows me the ability to influence things, so.
One question before I ask you my last one, which is any book in particular that has significantly influenced you that you're reading now or just that you really liked?
Yeah. The book I last read was Good to Great. Okay. And
I just finished it myself.
Okay. What I liked about it is the one of the chapters talked about getting the right hire, and you got to get the right people underneath you. You got to get the right person on the bus. You got to get them on the right seat on the bus, and if required, you got to get people off the bus. So, that's always been in my mind. You hire hard and manage lightly. Okay. Because when you say hire hard, I mean, it's there's a lot of diligence involved in making that right hire. So take your time. I know sometimes in environments where that it's more friendly to the candidate. You got to make a timely hire. You're going to lose it to somebody else. But you got to hire the right people, get them on the bus, get them on the right seat on the bus, and then if required, get them off the bus. But there's no team chemistry if everyone's not held to the same high standard. That's the other thing, I want to get across. I was inspired because if you ever go to Nick Saban, who was a head coach from Alabama, and go to his YouTube videos, he talks about that, getting the right people on the bus. And that's your job as a manager or as a coach, or, get the right people on the bus. The other thing he said that's along those lines that resonated with me, Nick Saban, in one of his YouTube videos, he said, mediocre people don't like high achievers, and high achievers don't like mediocre people.
Right.
If everyone's not held to the same high standards and have the same principles and values, it's hard to be successful. And that's right. One of the things senior management sometimes forgets, if you see an underperformer out there, everyone else in the business sees an underperformer. And if you don't take action on that, you're allowing people to quietly quit or retire in place. And like I said, it's hard to be successful. You got to hold everyone to the same high standards. But if you're allowing that behavior within your four walls, then they're going to say, well, hell, if Joe can get away with it, I'm going to start coasting too. And it's like, I use a sports analogy. It's like, you're only as good as your weakest player. It's like, how high schools and colleges and pros, they look at film, they study film. Look at the right guard. He has terrible pass coverage. We're going to blitz off that guy. You're only as good as your weakest link. And it's the same thing it's the same thing in business. If you got a weak performer, it pulls, you're only as strong as that weakest performer. His rest of the business can be exceptional, but you can't cover for everything all the time, Right. So, but you got to address it. You don't want to be the skunk at the yard party. But then again, if you're holding everyone to the same high standards, it's, the possibility for underperformance or error is minimal. And people appreciate that everyone's held to the same consistent standard.
I thought it was super interesting how it was like the second or third chapter. That's what that was, is just get the right people on the bus. Yeah. You don't even have to have your destination mapped yet. Just get the right people with the same mindset on there.
Right. And there's people that are in your organization or that struggle in their current job performance, but they can move into another role and excel. Going back to my one company I was with for over 20 years, we had a gentleman who was in our accounting department that just wasn't cutting it. Great guy. But we had that crucial conversation with him. He goes, I love the company because I'd really like the opportunity to run distribution. And we put him out there. He's still there. He's exceptional. So this is like, there's a guy where you don't want to lose him. He's struggling in his current role, but he's identified something he'd like to do. And attitude is a big part of it. Yes. He wants to embrace that opportunity. We put him in there, and we put him in a consigned warehouse in Europe. He ran it. He did exceptional. Our fill rates were fantastic. No errors. I mean, he was just great. That's where he excelled in a different role, and he's adding tremendous value to the organization, but he was in the wrong seat.
Yeah. It's amazing how it changes when you get somebody doing what they like to do.
Yep.
That's awesome. Final question. What advice would you give to aspiring financial leaders? Outside of all the good stuff you've already given us.
Talked about, I'd say, there's no real shortcuts. You need to put in the time and the work ethic and work to improve your skills every day, and don't coast. Every day identify an opportunity to improve the business, take cost out of the business. And develop relationships. Don't sit in a silo, and get out and, volunteer to be part of a cross-functional team that have identified an issue or a problem and be part of the solution, and get engaged with other members of the organization that you normally wouldn't interact with, but you're problem solving. Like, again, and then you're part of it. You're develop some camaraderie with the team. You're working actively with other members that you wouldn't normally interact with, and put in the time. There's no real shortcuts. Right. But have the right attitude, have a good work ethic, and, build relationships across the organization. And that doesn't mean you have to be fun loving every day. Like sometimes right. Sometimes you got to be the heavy and bring in the hammer as you move up higher. Right. But be part of the solution. Okay. Don't say, hey, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. Identify a problem, help solve it, help move the needle every day.
Yeah. And to one of the early points that you made was understand that you're probably going to be doing the job before you actually get the title. So try to put yourself in positions where you can get that experience.
Right.
Don't feel like you have to have the title to do the responsibility. No,
right.
It's quite the opposite.
It's seamless. It should be seamless. Yeah. You've demonstrated ability to be that individual. You just never had the title. You've done that stuff for almost like a year or two prior to actually having the title, but you've earned it, and you've demonstrated consistently that you're a strong performer. You're a team player. You're willing to put in the time, the work ethic, and you're also approachable. You got to be able to interact with outside of the business as well. And, I'm talking about bankers, lawyers. You're reviewing buy-sell agreements on assets, on sale of assets or sale of business. You're involved with due diligence. You may be involved with an investment banker. You're involved with risk, risk management for insurance. Yep. And outside legal counsel and in the accounting firm. So